I'm Major Lucas Grant. I'm 42 years old, just got back from a 9-month deployment in Afghanistan, and I never thought I'd be telling this story like it's someone else's. I've worn the uniform for over 2 decades, led men through combat, watched lives change in the blink of an IED. But nothing prepared me for what happened the day I came home to be honored. It was a bright afternoon at Fort Bragg. The kind of day where everything looks sharper through your sunglasses, like even the sun was standing at attention. Rows of chairs were lined up tight, brass everywhere, photographers elbowing for angles, and my name printed across the ceremony program like it meant something solid. I spotted my wife before I stepped up. She was in the second row, hair pinned the way she always did when she wanted to look camera-ready, smile painted just so. My younger brother Jake was beside her, in dress blues, looking too polished for someone who used to crash on my couch after flunking out of 2 colleges. I nodded in their direction. She didn't wave back. When my name was called, I moved like I'd rehearsed it 100 times in my head. Handshake, step forward, stand tall. A general clipped the medal to my chest, leaned in, whispered something about courage under fire. Cameras clicked, and somewhere someone started clapping. But my eyes weren't on the stage anymore. They were on the second row, on my wife, on my brother, on the way her hands slid behind his neck, the way their lips met like no one else existed. Like I didn't just return from war. Like I wasn't standing right there in the uniform that still smelled like the desert. It was public, purposeful, and silent. No one screamed. There was no gasp. Just this awful quiet, like someone had dropped a grenade and everyone was waiting for the sound. My hands didn't move. My smile didn't falter. I just stood there, beside a man I didn't know anymore, in front of a woman who wasn't mine anymore. The applause kept going. I think I even bowed my head, like some robot going through the motions. But my ears were ringing louder than they ever did in Kandahar. I remember thinking this must be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe I imagined it. But then I saw Jake's hand on her thigh. The way she leaned into his shoulder like they were posing for a holiday card. It was real. I didn't storm off. I didn't make a scene. I took the plaque. I shook the general's hand, and I walked off stage like nothing had just broken me in half. That was the moment it all changed. Not when the medal was clipped on, not when the cameras flashed, but when the woman I'd built a life for chose my brother in front of the whole damn world. And just like that, I was no longer a hero. I was a headline waiting to happen, a man whose battlefield started the second he got home. I met her when I was 22, stationed in Germany. She was a nursing student back in North Carolina, part of a volunteer group that sent handwritten letters to deployed soldiers. I never thought much of the first envelope until I opened it and found a story about a stubborn old dog she rescued. And for some reason, I couldn't stop reading. That letter turned into 5, then 20, then phone calls that ran too long and cost too much. When I came back on leave the following spring, we met for the first time in person at a diner off I-85. She wore a yellow sweater and smelled like vanilla, and I swear, it felt like I already knew her for years. We were married by the time I was 26. She stood in a small chapel in Fayetteville, shaking as much from laughter as nerves, holding wildflowers instead of roses. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. We had each other, and that was enough. We didn't have kids. Sometimes that was a wound. Other times it made us tighter, like we were a team of 2 in a world built for 4. We planted a garden behind our first house and named the tomato plants like they were pets. She used to come out every morning barefoot, coffee in one hand, talking to the basil like it would talk back. One year, I made captain, and she baked a chocolate cake from scratch. She burned the first batch and cried about it, then stayed up past midnight trying again. I came home to the smell of cocoa and saw the words, "You did it," written in messy icing that looked like it was piped by a 5-year-old. I've never tasted anything better in my life. We had a playlist for road trips, a routine for rainy Sundays, a shared calendar that somehow always ended up filled with her handwriting, even when it was for my appointments. She was the rhythm of the house, the one who remembered to buy light bulbs and never let the laundry pile up for too long. Looking back, it's not the big moments I miss. It's the way she used to hum while brushing her teeth. The way she folded my socks in half, never rolled. The way her hand found mine in the dark without saying a word. That was our history, and I thought it meant something permanent. I thought it would hold, but it didn't. Jake is 8 years younger than me. When our parents died in a car accident, I was barely 20, still in officer training. He was 12, quiet and scared, with a duffel bag full of comic books and a silence that broke my heart. I took guardianship without thinking twice, moved him into my tiny on-base apartment and tried to become more than just a brother. I became the guy who packed his lunches, helped with math homework, and sat through every miserable parent-teacher conference. He used to call me coach when he was mad and dad when he forgot. At first, it hurt to hear that word come out of his mouth. Then it started to feel like an honor, like maybe I was doing something right. When he got into college, money was tight. I pulled strings, leaned on every favor I had, and helped him qualify for a military scholarship. He didn't want it at first, said the army was my dream, not his, but he took it anyway. Said he owed me more than he could pay back. He lived with us during undergrad. Our spare bedroom turned into Jake's cave, walls covered with band posters and dirty laundry. My wife baked him birthday pies because he hated cake. We argued sometimes, like brothers do, but never about anything big. He once told a friend I was the reason he believed in structure. That without me, he'd be some guy drifting through life, never knowing what it meant to be dependable. That stayed with me. Still does. When I deployed, he stepped in, mowed the lawn, checked in on my wife, even called every Sunday just to say he was around if she needed anything. I was proud of him, maybe too proud. I never questioned his place in our lives, never doubted his loyalty, his goodness. I would have taken a bullet for that kid. Hell, I probably still would. That's the thing about family. You don't expect betrayal. Not from blood, not from someone you raised like a son. The lights above the stage were brighter than I expected. They hit from every angle, sharp and white, bouncing off the polished metals on my chest. The applause rolled over me like a slow wave, steady and polite, the kind reserved for something important but rehearsed. I stood at attention as the commanding officer read my citation. Behind him, the flag hung still, not a ripple in the cloth. My uniform itched at the collar, but I barely noticed. My focus was locked on the moment, on the pride that swelled as I heard my name read out loud. My team stood in formation, eyes forward, back straight. These were the guys I bled beside, the ones who knew what it meant to hold a line, to carry one another when legs gave out and hope ran low. As the medal was pinned to my chest, I felt the weight of it. Not the medal itself, but what it stood for. Months in a dust-choked hell, split-second decisions, names I still whispered in my sleep. I smiled, just a little. The kind of smile that's more breath than joy. I looked out across the crowd, scanning for her. I wanted to see her face, to anchor myself in something soft. I found her near the front, where I expected she'd be. She wore a navy dress and a calm smile, camera phone in hand, but her other hand was on Jake's shoulder. And then, just like that, she turned to him and kissed him. Not a cheek kiss, not a goodbye kiss, a real one. Firm, familiar, public. Time slowed. The clapping faded. I couldn't hear the next name called or the voice on the loudspeaker. All I saw was her lips on his. My wife, my brother. No shame, no hesitation. Jake didn't pull away. He leaned in, like this was theirs to share. Like I wasn't standing in full uniform 30 feet away. Like none of this meant anything anymore. There were no gasps. No one screamed. Just my own breath caught in my throat. My hand twitched at my side, not from anger, just from the sheer weight of the collapse. It felt like someone had cut the wires inside me. Everything went quiet. Still, I had never felt more alone in a room full of people. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't walk off stage or storm through the crowd. I stood there until the ceremony ended, shaking hands, nodding, smiling for pictures I would never look at again. The drive home was silent. No music, no words. Just the sound of tires rolling over pavement and the low hum of something breaking inside me. When I walked into the house, the air felt too still. I took off my jacket, unpinned the metal, and folded the uniform with the kind of care that felt detached. Like I was preserving something that had already died. I placed the metal in the drawer of my nightstand. Not out of shame, out of respect. It didn't deserve to be part of what was coming next. I didn't wait for explanations. I didn't check her texts or look for signs I might have missed. The time for questions was gone. I picked up my phone, scrolled past every name I knew until I landed on one. My lawyer. He answered on the first ring. I didn't clear my throat or waste a word. I just said what needed to be said. Let's begin. I didn't sleep that night. While the city settled into quiet, I opened my laptop and got to work. There were no tantrums, no broken glass, just clicks and folders opening one by one. The cameras I'd installed last year for security had more value than I expected. Footage from the living room, from the guest room, from the back porch where she once said she needed air. I scanned timestamps, paused, rewound, watched her and Jake in ways I'll never be able to unsee. It had started at least 3 months ago, maybe longer. I accessed our shared cloud. Her email history. Deleted messages weren't really deleted. Drafts saved more than she thought they did. Messages about weekends at the cabin. Ones Jake shouldn't have had access to. I cross-checked spending, trips to Asheville, one flight under her maiden name, a hotel room billed to our joint account on a night I was pinned down halfway across the world. Each file got a name, a number, backed up to a drive with military-grade encryption. I didn't allow myself to feel. Not then. When I was done, I compressed everything. Each screenshot, each thread, each breadcrumb that led back to them. I labeled the folder simply, Operation Resolve, not out of pettiness, out of clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was cleanup. No rage, just order. The next morning, I started moving pieces. First, I contacted the bank and froze our joint accounts. No confrontation, no explanation, just a signature and a scan of my ID. Then, I submitted paperwork to remove her as my next of kin in all military records. Benefits, emergency contacts, housing designations. Every trace of her name linked to mine was wiped clean. I changed the code to the safety box, updated my will, moved what needed moving without looking back. Jake's military scholarship was tied to a code of conduct. One clause required full disclosure of personal relationships that could compromise integrity. He hadn't disclosed anything, so I wrote to Jag, not in anger, but in accordance with the rules we both once vowed to follow. I attached what needed attaching. Every step I took felt like pulling a splinter from deep under the skin. Painful but necessary. Necessary to heal. This wasn't about destroying them. It was about reclaiming the ground I'd stood on before they ever crossed the line. Each action grounded me. One document at a time, I became less of a man betrayed and more of a man rebuilding. And I didn't flinch. Not once. She came back 2 days later. I heard her car before I saw her face, tires crunching the gravel like she still belonged. She walked in like nothing was broken that couldn't be fixed. Her eyes were red, makeup faded around the edges. She didn't start with excuses. She just said she made a mistake. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt. She said it was confusion, pressure, loneliness, that it happened fast, and she didn't know how to stop it once it started. She reached for my hand. I didn't move. Her voice cracked as she begged for one more chance, said we were more than this. I looked at her and saw someone I used to know. The shape of her face, the tone of her voice, but not the woman who used to sit beside me in quiet moments and just breathe. I reached into the drawer and slid the papers across the table. Divorce documents. Signed, dated, notarized. She stared at them like they might bite. Then she looked back at me, waiting for a reaction that never came. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That part of me had gone quiet. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was just the end of something that had already ended long before she kissed my brother. I told her we would handle it cleanly. No shouting, no courtroom drama, just signatures and distance. She tried to cry again, tried to say I was giving up too fast. But the truth was, I had held on too long. She said, I was the best thing that ever happened to her. I believed that, but I wasn't going to stay just to keep proving it. When she left, I didn't watch her go. I just stood at the window and let the silence settle. And for the first time in months, I felt still. A week after the divorce papers were filed, I packed what mattered and headed back to base. I didn't make any announcements, no dramatic exit, just a quiet return to duty. I asked for a transfer to Alaska, someplace cold, distant, clean, the kind of place where silence feels natural. They gave me a modest cabin near the training grounds, enough space for a bed, a desk, and a coffee pot. It was more than I needed. I woke early, ran every morning, led drills like I always had. Nothing flashy, just focus and repetition. My team didn't ask questions. Maybe they heard things, maybe they didn't, but they respected the quiet. In the evenings, I cooked for myself. Simple meals. Sometimes I read, sometimes I just sat on the porch and listened to the snow. I kept the medal. Didn't hang it, didn't display it. It stayed in a box tucked away in the drawer by my boots. Not because I was ashamed, but because it reminded me of a moment that cut both ways. Pride and pain, wrapped in the same ribbon. People talk about uniforms like they're just fabric, but mine was more than that. It held me up when everything else fell apart. It reminded me who I was before the betrayal, and who I could still be after it. I didn't rebuild overnight. Healing isn't loud. It's quiet choices made when no one's watching. Some nights, I thought about what could have been, but never with bitterness, just with distance. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to her, not to Jake, not to anyone. Because, somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need to win. I just needed to be whole again. And out here, in the cold, beneath the open sky, I found pieces of myself I thought were gone. Not all at once, but piece by piece, step by step. The truth is, I didn't walk away to start over. I walked away to remember who I was before I let someone else rewrite my story. Now, every time I zip up that uniform, I'm reminded. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strength waiting its turn. And I'm still standing. Not angry, not broken, just free.